In 2009, archaeologist Lauren Davis stood on the banks of the Salmon River in western Idaho, looking at a site that appeared deceptively ordinary. It was a quiet river terrace that locals and ranchers had walked over for decades, occasionally picking up odd-shaped stones eroding from the mud. As Davis and his team from Oregon State University began their systematic excavation, they had no idea they were standing on the edge of a scientific revolution. They were about to uncover the oldest confirmed human settlement in North America. Before we reveal what they found buried in these ancient river terraces and how DNA finally proves when humans really reached America, if you want to join us on these journeys into the deep past, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a discovery with Strata Files. The site is called Cooper's Ferry, but for the indigenous Nez Perce people, this location has always been known as Nipesh-e, an ancient village site preserved in their oral histories. For generations, archaeology treated oral traditions as myths, but the excavation at Cooper's Ferry would prove that the Nez Perce memory extends back deeper than the pyramids, deeper than the Ice Age, deeper than science thought possible. Davis's team started by excavating the upper layers. As expected, they found Clovis projectile points, the distinctive fluted spear tips that have defined the first Americans for nearly a century. Radiocarbon dates confirmed these artifacts were around 13,000 years old. This matched the textbook story perfectly. Clovis people crossed the Bering Land Bridge, walked through an ice-free corridor between massive Canadian glaciers, and became the first humans in America. It was a comfortable, settled theory. But then the team dug deeper. Below the Clovis layer, the familiar fluted points disappeared, the soil changed, and in the dark, compacted sediment beneath, they began finding something that should not have been there. The first major discovery was a fire hearth. This was not a natural burn. It was a deliberately constructed feature, a pit dug into the earth, lined with fire-cracked rocks to retain and distribute heat. Inside, they found charcoal, wood burned by human hands thousands of years ago. Surrounding this hearth were dozens of stone tools and hundreds of flakes of lithic debris, the razor-sharp waste left behind by master craftsmen. This was not a temporary campsite for a passing hunter. This was a processing station where people lived, worked, and prepared food. Then came the weapons. These were not Clovis points. They were stemmed points, blades with a sharp tip on one end and a carefully shaped stem on the other, designed to be hafted onto wooden shafts. Archaeologists call this the Western stemmed tradition. The team eventually recovered 189 stone artifacts from the deepest layers, including 27 complete tools, 13 of these stemmed projectiles, along with blades, scrapers, and other implements. But the most telling detail was not just what they found, but how they found it. These tools were discovered in cultural pits, deliberately excavated holes where people had cached high-quality implements, burying them for safekeeping. You do not cache valuable gear in a place you visit once. You cache it in places you know, places you trust, places you plan to return to. This indicated intimate knowledge of the landscape and repeated occupation over generations. When Davis sent charcoal samples from the hearth to laboratories for radiocarbon dating, the results shattered the timeline. The dates came back ranging between 15,000 and 16,000 years before present. It is important to note that the term before present, abbreviated BP, is used instead of years ago because of scientific convention. BP dates are calibrated against the year 1950, when extensive radiocarbon dating began. This settlement was active 3,000 years before the Clovis culture even existed. This created a massive geographical impossibility. 16,000 years ago, the famous ice-free corridor through Canada didn't exist. The Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets were at their maximum extent, more than a mile thick in places, creating an impenetrable wall of ice stretching from Alaska to Montana. Even if a small gap had physically opened, recent biological studies show it would have been a desolate, muddy wasteland with no plants or animals to sustain travelers. The door was locked. If people were living in Idaho 16,000 years ago, they couldn't have walked there. They must have arrived by a completely different route. The breakthrough came when the team examined the tools themselves. The stemmed points from Cooper's Ferry were made from cryptocrystalline silicate, a high-quality stone that fractures like glass and creates edges sharper than surgical steel. This material does not occur naturally at the site. It had to be sourced from specific geological deposits miles away, proving these people were mobile, organized, and resource-savvy enough to seek out the best materials. But the real revelation was the design. These stemmed points looked almost identical to late Upper Paleolithic tools found in Hokkaido, Japan, dating to roughly 20,000 years ago. The manufacturing techniques matched perfectly. Both traditions used the same core reduction methods. Both created predetermined flake blanks using Levallois-like techniques. Both rejected the fluted style that would later define Clovis, in favor of stemmed bases designed for different hafting methods. The technological fingerprint was undeniable. The first Americans at Cooper's Ferry carried stoneworking traditions directly from northeastern Asia. And since the overland route was blocked by ice, there was only one way they could have reached Idaho: by boat. This confirms what researchers call the Kelp Highway hypothesis. During the last glacial maximum, while Canada was buried under ice sheets more than 2 miles thick in some places, the Pacific coastline remained open. More importantly, it was extraordinarily rich. Kelp forests stretched for thousands of miles, creating an ecosystem teeming with fish, seals, sea otters, shellfish, and seabirds. For a maritime culture, which these groups clearly were, this was not a barrier, it was a superhighway, a kelp highway. Starting around 17,000 years ago, groups began island hopping south from Beringia, the now submerged landmass that connected Siberia and Alaska. They followed the abundance, establishing camps along the coast, then pushing farther south. The Columbia River Basin, where Cooper's Ferry sits, would have been the first major off-ramp into the interior. The Salmon River, rich with spawning fish every season, would have drawn them upstream repeatedly to this exact terrace. But they were not just fishing. Scattered among the stone tools, the team found 86 bone fragments. These were not from deer or elk. They were tooth fragments from an extinct species of Ice Age horse known as equus. This is the smoking gun. These fragments were found in direct association with the stone tools and hearths in the cultural layers, proving the inhabitants of Cooper's Ferry were hunting and butchering megafauna that vanished at the end of the Ice Age. This is where DNA enters the story and connects the archaeology to living people. In 2014, geneticist Esker Willerslev sequenced the genome of the Anzac child, an infant buried 12,600 years ago in Montana with over 100 Clovis tools and covered in red ochre. The boy became the Rosetta Stone of Native American genetics. Willeslev's analysis revealed that roughly 80% of all present-day Native Americans, from Canada to Chile, are direct descendants of this boy's family. The DNA showed something crucial. The Anzac child shared about 1/3 of his genome with a 24,000-year-old boy from Malta, Siberia, near Lake Baikal. The remainder came from ancestral East Asian populations. This meant that groups from Siberia and East Asia met and mixed before 25,000 years ago, creating a unique founding population that became isolated in Beringia for thousands of years before expanding south. The critical link came from another ancient individual, the Spirit Caveman from Nevada, who died 10,700 years ago. He was found with Western stem tradition tools, the exact same technology found at Cooper's Ferry. Genetic analysis proved he was closely related to the Anzac child and, by extension, to modern Native Americans. This connects the dots perfectly. The people who made the stemmed points at Cooper's Ferry 16,000 years ago were the direct ancestors of the Clovis people who appeared 3,000 years later. Clovis did not replace the first Americans, they evolved from them. The Western stem tradition was not evidence of a separate migration, it was the technology of the founding population as they moved down the Pacific coast and pushed inland. The most remarkable thing about Cooper's Ferry is not just one spectacular date, it is the persistence. As the team excavated deeper, they found evidence of repeated occupation spanning 3,000 years, from 16,000 to 13,000 years ago. Multiple generations returned to this exact spot, used the same river terrace, hunted the same animals, and cached tools in the same pits. The law of superposition, a fundamental principle of geology, tells us the oldest material is always at the bottom in undisturbed layers. At Cooper's Ferry, the deepest cultural deposits date to roughly 16,000 years ago. Since they found fully formed hearths, sophisticated tools, and processed animal remains at that level, human activity almost certainly began even earlier. Some archaeologists involved believe the initial settlement could approach 17,000 years ago. Superposition and the archaeological record point to an earlier start. This makes Cooper's Ferry one of the oldest confirmed human settlements in the Western Hemisphere. It provides the final nail in the coffin for the ice-free corridor theory. The first Americans did not wait patiently for the ice to melt. They did not trudge through a narrow gap between glaciers. They were sophisticated mariners who sailed down the Pacific coast with Asian technologies, navigating river systems deep into the continent millennia before we thought possible. The story of the first Americans has fundamentally changed. It is no longer a tale of big game hunters stumbling across a land bridge into an empty continent. It is a story of exploration, ingenuity, and adaptation. It is about boats navigating icy waters. It is about people who spotted a river delta from the ocean and decided to follow it. It is about a culture sophisticated enough to cache tools for future retrieval and organized enough to return to the same camps generation after generation. Cooper's Ferry, with its hidden caches of stemmed points, its hearths that burned while ice sheets still loomed large over Canada, and its fragments of extinct horses, stands as definitive proof. When these maritime pioneers reached the rivers of Idaho 16,000 years ago, they did not just pass through. They built fires, they buried their treasures, they hunted Ice Age megafauna, and they found a place worth calling home. Till the next discovery, this is Strata Files.